Hi, everyone. So my name is Nick Gates. You can also call me Nicholas. I'm a senior policy advisor with Open Forum Europe. We are a nonprofit think tank based in Brussels, Belgium. I'm based in Vienna, so I work remotely. But here today, I'm representing the Open Source Observatory. So I'm going to talk about some EU-funded research that we did on open source adoption and reuse in European local governments. And I should mention that OSOR is funded by DG Digit, and we work on this project in collaboration with a consultancy called Wavestone. So what we did is we did a 5-case study report. It was published late last year in September, and you can download it on our website. I'll give you a QR code to do that in just a moment. So this is myself and Johan Linoker. We're the two main authors of the report, though we also had support from Simon Weber and Yanis Trumuziadis. If you want to download this report, please feel free to go ahead and do so. You can use this QR code, and we encourage you to read through it. If you would like a more kind of digestible version, we also have some summaries available on the website. And we also have longer, in-depth narrative versions of the case studies that are annexed in this report. So the case studies that I'll talk through are all available as kind of longer case studies with nice, fun quotes and detailed findings, etc. So really what we were trying to accomplish in this research was to start a conversation and to fill a gap. What we found was that there wasn't really any systematic research of open source adoption and reuse in European local governments. We use the term local governments very deliberately, by the way. I'll get into that in a moment. And we just wanted to fill the gap. So there was systematic literature available on FOSS adoption and reuse, but not at that level. And so we wanted to kind of start that conversation and provide a framework for kind of thinking about how we can investigate this area of open source adoption and reuse in more depth. So here's the problem context, exactly as I said it. We found that on the local level of government, there's a lot of adoption and use of common open source software solutions, and there is collaboration on their development and maintenance, but it's not really well understood in terms of public sector organizations. And so we wanted to create new knowledge in that area and start the conversation around different archetypes for how open source collaboration is happening at this level. So we did a simple literature review. We reviewed over 60 papers, analyzed over 30 papers specifically in depth, and then incorporated about 15 of them into the final written document. So we have a detailed thematic analysis available, which kind of summarizes some of the problems and challenges in the literature that I mentioned. I personally did a mapping of over 1,000 projects, policies, institutions, and activities at the European kind of local level. Also the regional level, though ultimately we'll only focus on local use cases. And then we shortlisted around 20 to 25 case studies, resulting in the selection of these 5, and I'll explain that selection in just a moment. We also conducted over 19 interviews across 21 different persons for the 5 case studies, and they all made their way into the final report. So here were some of the archetypes that we kind of hypothesized in the lead up to this study, because we wanted to get a wide and kind of representative sample of different types of collaboration happening in local governments. This is not all of the archetypes that made it into the final report. I'll highlight those in a moment. But they were ways that we were kind of thinking about what are the kind of ways that open governments come to adopt or reuse or collaborate on software at this level. So one archetype that is very familiar to many of you is that software can end up in a foundation. So it becomes very widely reused, it's very popular, and it actually spins out into a foundation, which is responsible for its sustainability, and then other governments go, oh, that's shiny, we want to use that. There's kind of this international but less adopted kind of software that's out there that people in the know, but is not necessarily in a foundation. It has a reputation, but it's more known among developers, or it's kind of being used, but at very different levels of the stack, maybe not at the service delivery layer. There's also kind of local open source solutions that are being developed by non-public sector bodies and reused, those that are being developed by public or quasi-public bodies. I'll get into the quasi-public in a moment. There's intercity collaborations, one of which we highlighted in the report ultimately, around kind of a common open source software solution. There's very local solutions that are developed in a city but aren't being reused anywhere. And we actually found through this project that people decide to open source their software for many different reasons. It's not just around adoption and reuse. And then there's also regional adoption and customization of existing general projects for local needs. So what we really found was that open source collaboration at this level is incredibly diverse. There's not a single way that people come to it. And there's kind of cascading effects of how different groups intersect to help use open source software at that level. So we really wanted to kind of unpack this, and this was just kind of our first entry point into kind of surfacing case studies that might be interesting. Ultimately, we focused on 5 case studies, and we chose 5 case studies that we think represented a diverse cross-section of those different archetypes and spoke to different collaboration dynamics. And so I'm going to talk you through each of the 5 cases, and then kind of what they told us in terms of the archetypes for open source collaboration, and then we'll unpack where we might do further research. So one, which is very well known, is called Consul Democracy. Some of you might have heard it. So Consul emerged in Spain around 2015. I think there was kind of a movement in kind of the mid-2010s towards citizen participation software, and you saw kind of a very rapid adoption. Consul was at the very beginning of that. So Decidim, which will also have a presentation later today, kind of came in the wave of that 2015 election in Spain. And there was a lot of kind of progressive, democracy-minded parties that were emerging that wanted to bring democracy direct to the people. And one way they did that was very quickly, rapidly iterating and developing an open source software solution that enabled people to participate in democratic processes at the local level. So Consul kind of very much thrived in this period. Decidim kind of emerged as kind of a fork of Consul, and they've both been very successful. But we also saw kind of how local political elections also influence open source software. So in particular, even more so than at the national level, you're really subject to kind of the waves of political momentum and support that can drive a project. And so after 2019, when the government changed in the city of Madrid, we actually saw kind of a decline in support for Consul. And this was kind of exacerbated by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And so you saw kind of a falling off of the project, so to speak. But what you're seeing now is a very deliberate effort by the Consul Democracy Foundation, which was initiated in 2019 as that support waned, to really kind of bring the code base back together, kind of stitch together all of these efforts and kind of like rebuild the community that was really thriving in that early period. So despite some challenges in governance and funding, what we saw here was a really successful example of an international foundation really trying to support, and in this case even revive, kind of a community, bring in effective governance structures, and kind of build bridges to allow public sector organizations to collaborate in diverse ways. And this case study was really interesting to us because it also allowed it to be kind of an umbrella. You could do a case study of case studies. So we spoke to the folks at Code for Romania, and that was a really interesting example of, as I'll get to with another case study, a civil society organization providing direct support, almost serving like a system integrator to help install and customize a solution for several local governments. We saw a municipal association called COSLA in Scotland. It's the Scottish Association of Municipalities that was working to basically provide Consul as a service and kind of maintain it on behalf of all the municipalities in Scotland. We also saw a very active kind of project coming in and contributing to the governance and financial sustainability of Consul, and that was Munich, the city of Munich in Germany. So there's many different ways to unpack what's going on in Consul, but I think it's a really fascinating example of many of the different collaboration dynamics that I highlighted earlier. Another one is OS2 Bürgerpässe and MedBürgerpässe. So this is kind of a library software. It's based on Ubuntu. And it is packaged for libraries at the municipal level. So this originated in not in Copenhagen, in Aarhus in Denmark. And it was kind of iterated on as a kind of collaboration between the supplier, Magenta, and OS2. There was a lot of kind of complications in terms of different philosophies that each of those institutions brought to the use of this software. And so what we observed here was kind of how suppliers can become very dominant and play an outsized role in local open source ecosystems, and how that can support but also come into conflict with the efforts of kind of public sector institutions in some cases when there's differing opinions around governance and sustainability and things like that. So really what we saw is kind of OS2, which is this municipal association, seeking to drive open source support for local IT solutions, for local open source solutions, as kind of playing a role in kind of disseminating this project to a lot of different municipalities. But we also saw some governments choosing to work directly with Magenta. And then we also saw interesting cross-border dynamics when eventually Sambruck, which is the kind of counterpart to OS2 and wants to support adoption of open source solutions in Sweden, also interested in adopting the same software. And there were some dynamics there where Magenta was collaborating across borders with the folks at Sambruck as well. Yeah, we had a lot of lessons that we learned here, but I guess the number one, yeah, is the role of the suppliers, but also kind of that municipalities need to do continuous checks and reviews of concerned projects, that they should be wary of kind of procurement processes, so market size and potential turnover in relationship to the number of service suppliers where where services are procured from. And yeah, I think just a lot of really interesting dynamics to unpack. This is another example of kind of that local kind of custom open source solution that emerges. So Golemio was organized and then eventually kind of run by Operator ICT, which is what I'll call a quasi-public sector body, so kind of a state-owned IT corporation. And they did all of the original kind of coding and development of Golemio as a smart data platform to provide data services to the city of Prague. And then eventually they chose to open source the solution because they found that it actually helped to kind of make collaboration within the city easier, ostensibly, and also because it helped to retain and attract developer talent, people that were very interested in also participating in open source communities. And so what we haven't seen in this case is a lot of kind of sharing and reuse outside of the borders of the city of Czechia, though the city of Prague, but there is kind of limited cross-border sharing within Czechia, specifically with the city of Bohemia region, which with the Bohemia region, which of course makes sense given that Prague is located in the Bohemia region, and there needs to be some collaboration in terms of integrated transport planning there, which is one of the use cases. So what we really saw here is a really great example of a public sector body kind of working in a very agile and iterative way. Really kind of a great example of building trust within city stakeholders and kind of facilitating horizontal and cross-departmental collaboration through the open source and kind of licensing of its software, even where they weren't really focused on or interested in kind of international use cases, though they did get some kind of interested organizations approaching them. So yeah, I think this can show that successful open source software solutions at the local level often can come out of solving very kind of specific local needs. And it's ultimately, as you see with Consul, that type of innovation that can get reused internationally. We haven't seen that in this case, but I think it's a very prominent example of how that might emerge. Here's another very interesting example. This is a solution for parliaments called Parliamator. So this was initiated and is still to this day maintained by a civil society organization in Slovenia called Danes je nov dan. And Danes je nov dan is one of the more interesting organizations I've encountered in this space. They basically seek to promote democracy as part of their mission, and they kind of function very much like a civil society organization. So many of their staff are non-technical and focus on promoting democracy and facilitating adoption of tools and trainings and capacity building efforts. But we also have a strong technical team at Danes je nov dan who kind of contributes to the development of Parliamator and kind of supplies it as a service to interested parliaments. We see this specifically at the local level across Slovenia. So there was kind of widespread adoption across a number of municipalities in Slovenia. But then we also saw it at the national level in Slovenia, and then eventually kind of cross-border sharing and reuse, looking at governments in, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. So this is a really great example of how kind of civil society and kind of a nonprofit-driven service supplier model can kind of step in and help support open source adoption and reuse in kind of low-capacity governments. It also kind of speaks to kind of cultural resistance and political challenges and how that can kind of be overcome through kind of a more integrated service supplier model. But we also were really encouraged to see that there's ways of structuring those relationships in ways that are not profit-driven and not highly extractive. So you don't ultimately end up seeing a lot of kind of, let's say, technical capacity building in kind of the beneficiary institutions, but you do see a lot of support for the solution and kind of appreciation of the dynamics of open source software collaboration and reuse. And then the last one is Digitransit. So Digitransit is in many ways a very traditional open source collaboration in the sense that they find some code online, in this case Open Trip Planner, and they try and kind of build their own solution that builds on top of that. And what they really sought to do was to kind of use this kind of core of integrated transportation logistics software to kind of build a custom solution for the Helsinki region. And we also saw a lot of kind of horizontal collaboration between a number of different actors. I won't go into all the names, just not to confuse you, in kind of the Helsinki region, and then eventually sharing kind of reuse within Finland, so by other municipalities, but also across borders, including with Estonia, for example. So here we saw a really kind of compelling use case around how a city can kind of manage a burgeoning open source software community, how they can develop like clear documentation and onboarding processes, really start building a community within kind of national borders, and kind of really use standards to enable broader adoption, and then participate in true co-development where you see public sector institutions really kind of working upstream and collaborating in a very consistent way that is commensurate with traditional open source software collaboration dynamics. So what does all this tell us? Basically, we think that there are kind of three archetypes. So we focused in on three buckets. The first one is local governments. The second one is around the service suppliers. And then the third one is around communities. And we looked at how all of these different kind of stakeholder groups interact with one another to promote kind of the adoption and reuse of open source software at the local level. So in terms of local governments themselves, and we didn't focus on municipalities or cities or villages because there's a very kind of diverse range of different governance types. We focused on what was kind of external to them, what was internal to them, and then what was kind of quasi-internal, for lack of a better term. So external capabilities, that really relates to kind of the pooling of resources through foundations or local government associations like OS2, or through trusted external service suppliers like Magenta. Internal capabilities, we see this very prominently in the cases of Digitransit and in Golemio. That means kind of building the capabilities to collaborate and participate in open source software communities within the government, but that requires substantial and long-term investments. What we saw was really prominent here was the use of kind of IT corporations or companies that were kind of owned by the government. And you also see that at the national level with PagoPA in Italy, for example. And this seemed to be a very interesting model for some of the bigger local governments in particular. And that kind of relates to kind of the quasi-internal capabilities. So these like kind of organizations that can kind of come on board. Some of them are listed as joint stock companies, as in the case of Operator ICT, and are subsidized by local governments and kind of do this collaboration as an extension of the state. And there's differing kind of findings in terms of how different governments are able to translate that back into kind of internal capability within the city government itself. But that's some of the examples of archetypes that we saw emerging. And again, or not again, but I would like to emphasize that I don't think any of these archetypes are very strictly defined. So you can't just say this is one archetype. They're kind of overlapping, and I think it should be more of a useful heuristics for starting to think about assessing or evaluating what's going on in a given jurisdiction. Then we have community-based archetypes. So we talked about with Consul the role of international foundations. This is a model that can really be brought in to help kind of ensure the health and long-term sustainability of a community. And in the case of Consul Democracy, for example, we actually found that it really helped to save that project. And while their efforts kind of flagged a little bit, they're really kind of doing all of the effort. They're becoming a digital public good. They're getting out there and exploring new fundraising channels to really kind of revive the community, bring some elements of the code base back together, and promote more collaboration between all of the different cities that are reusing that software. National provider-oriented associations, so this would be, for example, like municipal associations. There's also development-oriented associations, so those that enable pooling of resources and capabilities like Danesian of Dan did to kind of support the interlinking and kind of collaboration amongst these different governments that were adopting this solution for parliaments. And then supplier-based archetypes. So again, with the Danasi and Novdan example, you see kind of what I would call a civil society service supplier. But you also see local government-owned service suppliers. So that's the example of Operator ICT or HSL in Helsinki. And then you also see private service suppliers like Magenta. Everybody is familiar with this kind of example. But there's different relationships that governments have with service suppliers. Some of them can be very kind of hierarchical and top-down. In the case of Magenta, it was kind of a very much a relationship based on kind of mutual exchange. And so there's actually a lot of participation in kind of the community that is supplying the solution. They don't just kind of customize and run. So yeah, I think it's really worth looking at and unpacking all of the different dynamics across these different groups. I won't go through all of these in depth because I think I'm running out of time a little bit, but if you go into our report, we have a number of recommendations that kind of surfaced based on our kind of evaluation of these different case studies and how the archetypes overlap. And so I encourage you to kind of dig in and read those. But things like explicitly defining policy goals kind of firsthand is really important. Being able to self-assess, and we hope that kind of using our kind of nascent framework, you can do that. Helps you map out kind of barriers and challenges, and then think about what the different relationships are and the incentives that are involved are. You can inventory what capabilities are needed, and then hopefully you kind of think about these different kind of logics and how they intersect to begin thinking about what resources you might need and how you might solve a specific challenge for your local use case. Again, not again, but designing solutions with interoperability and reuse is very important. Dedicating central funds to support development and maintenance. This was really prominent, particularly in some of the examples of kind of public sector institutions doing this themselves. Striving towards an open and kind of agile culture in procurement and development of new software solutions. Actively considering how to support development and maintenance. The role of local government associations, paying attention to the conditions necessary for service suppliers to kind of maintain sustainable business models. You see different ways this is happening, for example, with Magenta in Denmark or with Danasi and Novdan in Slovenia. And then just considering what role kind of existing bodies or associations can play in supporting open source adoption, development, and collaboration. I was really heartened in particular with the Consul case study around COSLA, which has a very small staff of like 1.5 people that are kind of maintaining and providing an instance of Consul Democracy to all of the local municipalities in Scotland, and doing so in a very cost-efficient way. And then finally, just considering who is kind of the steward, supporting kind of these open source solutions long-term, figuring out how you can build that into the planning, and then also actively involving relevant service suppliers in technical governance and coordination. So, this is kind of a bit of a scattershot series of kind of recommendations. There's a more detailed subset of them across different archetypes in the report. I hope you'll consider going in and reading the case studies. I think they kind of map out interesting collaboration dynamics, and that we've been able to kind of surface some of the interesting things that we were able to find through our research. Ultimately, what we hope this is kind of a taxonomy, so to speak, for starting to think about open source collaboration, but one that we hope to build on. We haven't specifically identified further research that we can do in this area, but we really want to kind of begin maybe using some of this research to kind of map out other case studies, or maybe even to work with a local government that could say, evaluate what they're going to do in the future based on some of these dynamics and see if that assists in kind of surfacing some insights around how they could do the planning. So yeah, I hope that you all took something away, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Nicholas?
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I'm wondering, did you also look into where the impulse for starting this project comes from? Because I'm wondering about this very much. I'm a fellow Viennese, and like I would be very curious, like where this would actually start. Would it start on a political level, or from like within the administration, or from outside actors? I guess like all of your case studies answer this a little bit differently, but is there a common thread here?
Yeah, I would say the most common thread is that there needs to be some level of political will, and when I say political will, I mean like from a policymaker. So that can start from the outside in the sense of a politician or a policymaker goes to a conference and they're approached, and or a bureaucrat approaches them with a compelling idea. But really, kind of the through line here was that you need kind of senior leadership bought in very early. And so you saw this most directly with Consul, like a very specific example of like, we want to bring democracy to the people. How are we going to do this? Oh, we can build this solution and we can do it in 3 months. But there's also kind of, examples within, say, like Operator ICT of how they were able to kind of really just kind of onboard the government and say that putting an MIT license on this software is actually going to make it easier for us to collaborate across the rest of the government, because a lot of us are working in silos. There's also examples of Danesi and Novdan doing some of the capacity building and training with kind of policymakers and officials to help them understand what the solution is, what it means that it has an open license, how they can leverage it, how they can request features back upstream, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Are you aware, or maybe have done yourself, a similar study for academic organizations?
Like universities, or what do you mean by?
Yes.
No, we haven't, but I would be really interested to do that. And I think we could probably, map out similar archetypes I could imagine at the university level. I would say, the proliferation of OSPOs is becoming more advanced in the national public sector. We see this through the EC OSPO network. And we also hopefully we'll see kind of even more of that with the new open source strategy that will promote kind of OSPOs or OSPO-like institutions to support adoption and reuse at that level. But it kind of all originated in universities. And so I think this would be a really compelling piece of research, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.